Welcome back. Today's chapter is called The Hermit of the Southern March. I'm not sure if you guys know what a hermit is, but a hermit is someone who lives by themselves. And a march is, you know how we live in Grundy County? Our county is called Grundy. Well, a march is kind of like that. It's kind of like a county, but not quite. Okay? So, just thought I would start off there. So basically you can think of this like someone who lives alone in a certain county. Although a march isn't really kind of like a county, it's more like a military county. Think of it like that. Yeah, sorry. I'm giving you some history education. I'm not certified to do that, but whatever. All right. Chapter 10, The Hermit of the Southern March. After they had ridden for several hours down the valley, it widened out, and they could see what was ahead of them. The river, which they had been following, here joined a broader river, wide and turbulent, which flowed from the left to the right toward the east. Beyond this new river, a delightful country rose. Whoops, excuse me. Just ate some bread and butter, so still swallowing. Beyond this new river, a delightful country rose gently in low hills, ridge beyond ridge, to the northern mountains themselves. To the right, there were rocky pinnacles, one or two of them with snow clinging to the ledges. To the left, pine-clad slopes, frowning cliffs, narrow gorges, and blue peaks stretched away as far as the eye could see. He could no longer make out Mount Pyre. Straight ahead, the mountain range sank to a wooded saddle, which of course must be the pass from Auchenland into Narnia. The north, the green north, neighed Bree. And certainly the lower hills looked greener and fresher than anything Aravis and Shasta, with their southern-bred eyes, had ever imagined. Spirits rose as they clattered down to the water's meet of the two rivers. The eastern flowing river, which was pouring from the higher mountains at the western end of the range, was far too swift and too broken with the rapids for them to think of swimming it. But after some casting about up and down the bank, they found a place shallow enough to wade. The roar and clatter of water, the great swirl against the horses' fetlocks, and cool steering air and darting dragonflies filled Chester with a strange excitement. "Friends, we are in Darkenland," said Bree, proudly, as he splashed and churned his way out onto the northern bank. "I think that river we just crossed is called the Winding Arrow." "Oh, I hope we're in time," murmured Wen. Then they began going up, slowly and zigzagging a good deal, for the hills were steep. It was all open, park-like country with no roads or houses in sight. Scattered trees, never thick enough to be a forest, were everywhere. Shasta, who had lived all his life in an almost treeless grassland, had never seen so many or so many kinds. If you had been there, you would probably have known, he didn't, that he was seeing oaks, beeches, silver birches, rowans, and sweet chestnuts. Rabbits scurried away in every direction as they advanced, and presently they saw a whole herd of fallow deer making off among the trees. "Isn't it simply gorgeous?" said Aravis. At the first ridge, Shasta turned into the saddle and looked back. there was no sign of Tashbaan. The desert, unbroken except by the narrow green crack which they had travelled down, spread to the horizon. "Hello," he said suddenly. "What's that?"
"What's what?"
said Bree, turning round. Hwin and Aravis did the same. "That," said Shasta, pointing. "It looks like smoke. Is it a fire?"
"Sandstorm, I should say,"
said Bree. "Not much wind to raise it," said Aravis. "Oh!" exclaimed Hwin. "Look! There are things flashing in it. Look! They're helmets and armor! It's moving this way!" "By Tash!" said Aravis. "It's the army! It's Rabadash!" "Of course it is," said Hwin. "Just what I was afraid of. Quick! We must get to Anvard before it!" And without another word, she whisked round and began galloping north. Bree tossed his head and did the same. "Come on, Bree! Bree, come on!" yelled Aravis over her shoulder. The race was very grueling for the horses. As they topped each ridge, they found another valley and another ridge beyond it, and though they knew they were going in more or less the right direction, no one knew how far it was to Anvard. From the top of the second ridge, Shasta looked back again. Instead of a dust cloud well out in the desert, he saw now a black moving mass, rather like ants on the far bank of the winding arrow. They were doubtless looking for a ford. "They're on the river!" he yelled wildly. "Quick! Quick!" shouted Aravis. She might as well not have come at all. Whoa, whoops. Sorry. That's dialogue. "Quick! Quick!" shouted Aravis. "We might as well not come at all if we're not to reach Anvard in time. Gallop, Bree, gallop, remember! You're a warhorse!" It was all Chester could do to prevent himself from shouting out similar instructions. But he thought, the poor chap's doing all he can already, and held his tongue. And certainly both horses were doing, if not all they could, all they thought they could, which is not quite the same thing. Bree had caught up with Hwin, and they thundered side by side over the turf. It didn't look as if Hwin could possibly keep it up much longer. At that moment, everyone's feelings were completely altered by a sound from behind. It was not the sound they had been expecting to hear. The noise of hooves and jingling armor mixed perhaps with Cologne and battle cries. Yet Shasta knew it at once. It was the same snarling roar he had heard that moonlight night when they first met Aravis and Hwin. Bree knew it too. His eyes gleamed red and his ears lay flat back on his skull. And Bree now discovered that he had not really been going as fast, not quite as fast as he could. Now they were really going all out, and in a few seconds they were well ahead of Hwin. "It's not fair," thought Shasta. "I did think we'd be safe from lions here." He looked over his shoulder. Everything was only too clear. A huge tawny creature, its body low to the ground like a cat, streaking across the lawn to a tree when a strange dog has gotten into the garden, was behind them. And it was nearer every second and half-second. He looked forward again and saw something which he did not take in or even think about. Their way was barred by a smooth green wall about 10 feet high. In the middle of that wall was a gate open. In the middle of the gateway stood a tall man dressed down to his bare feet in a robe clothed like autumn leaves, leaning on a straight staff. His beard fell almost to his knees. Shasta saw all of this in a glance and looked back again. The lion had almost got to Hwin now. It was making snaps at her hind legs, and there was no hope now in her foam-flecked, wide-eyed face. "Stop!" yelled Shasta in Bree's ear. "We must go back! We must help!" Bree always said after the word that he never heard or never understood this, and as he was generally a very truthful horse, we must accept his word. Shasta slipped his feet out of the stirrups, slid both of his legs over the left side, hesitated for a hideous 100th of a second, and jumped. It hurt horribly and nearly winded him, But before he knew how much it hurt, he was staggering back to help Aravis. He had never done anything like this in his life before, and hardly knew why he was doing it now. One of the most terrible noises in the world, a horse's scream, broke from Hwyn's lips. Aravis was stooping over Hwyn's neck and seemed to be trying to draw her sword. And now all three, Aravis, Hwyn, and the lion, were almost on top of Shesta. Before they reached him, the lion rose on his hind legs, larger than you would have believed a lion could, and jabbed at Aravis with its right paw. Shesta could see all the terrible claws extended. Aravis screamed and reeled in the saddle. The lion was tearing her shoulders. Shesta, half mad with horror, managed to lurch toward the brute. He had no weapon, not even a stick or a stone. He shouted out, idiotically, as one would to a dog, "Go home! Go home!" For a fraction of a second, he was staring right into its wide-open, raging mouth. Then, to his utter surprise, the lion, still on its hind legs, checked itself suddenly, turned head over heels, and rushed away. Shesta did not for a moment suppose it had gone for good. He turned and raced for the gate and the green wall, which now, for the first time, he remembered seeing. Hwyn, stumbling and nearly fainting, was just entering the gate. Aravis still kept her seat, but her back was covered with blood. "Come in, my daughter, come in," the robed and bearded man was saying, and then, "Come in, my son," as Shesta panted up to him. He heard the gate close behind him, and the bearded stranger was already helping Aravis off her horse. They were in a wide and perfectly circular enclosure, protected by a high wall of green turf. A pool of perfectly still water, so full that the water was almost exactly level with the ground, lay before him. At one end of the pool, completely overshadowing it with its branches, there grew the hugest and most beautiful tree that Shesta had ever seen. Below the pool was a little low house of stone roofed with deep and ancient thatch. There was a sound of bleating, and over at the far side of the enclosure were some goats. The level ground was completely covered with the finest grass. Are you, panted Shesta, are you King Lune of Archenland? The old man shook his head. "No," he replied in a quiet voice. "I am the hermit of the Southern March. And now, my son, waste no time on questions, but obey. This damsel is wounded, your horses are spent. Rapidash is at this moment finding a ford over the Winding Arrow. If you run now, without a moment's rest, you will still be in time to warn King Lune." Shesta's heart fainted at these words, for he felt he had no strength left, and he writhed inside at what seemed the cruelty and fairness of the demand. He had not yet learned that if you do one good deed, your reward usually is to be set to do another and harder and better one. Very, very philosophical. Just think about that. One good deed, you get it done, and then you have to do a harder one. Oh yeah, these books are like philosophy to me. So many good nuggets in there. Sorry, I got off on I digress. And he writhed inside what seemed the cruelty and fairness of the demand. He had not yet learned that if you do one good deed, your reward usually is to be set to do another and harder and better one. But all he said aloud was, "Oh, where is the king?" The hermit turned and pointed with his staff. "Look," he said, "there is another gate, right outside to the one you entered by. Open it and go straight ahead, always straight ahead, over level or steep, or smooth or rough, over dry or wet. I know by my art you will find King Lune straight ahead, but run, always run." Shasta nodded his head, ran to the northern gate, and disappeared beyond it. Then the hermit took Erebus, whom he had all this time been supporting with his left arm, and half led, half carried her into the house. After a long time, he came out again. "Now, cousins," he said to the horses, "it is your turn." Without waiting for an answer, and indeed they were too exhausted to speak, he took the bridles and saddles off both of them. Then he rubbed them both down so well that a groom in the king's stable could not have done it better. "There, cousins," he said, "dismiss it all from your minds and be comforted. Here is water and there is grass. You shall have hot mash when I have milked my other cousins, the goats." "Sir," said Hwin, finding her voice at last, "will the Tarkina live? Has the lion killed her?" "I, who know many present things by my art," replied the hermit with a smile, "have yet little knowledge of things future. Therefore I do not know whether any man or woman or beast in the whole world will be alive when the sun sets tonight. But be of good hope. The damsel is likely to live as long as any of her age." When Erebus came to herself, she found that she was lying on her face on a cool bed of extraordinarily softness in a cool, bare room with walls of undressed stone. She didn't quite understand why she had been laid on her face, but when she tried to turn and felt the hot, burning pains all over her back, she remembered and realized why. She couldn't understand what delightfully springy stuff the bed was made of, because it was made of heather, which is the best bedding. Sure it is, C.S. Lewis. Sure it is. You know, it actually might be. And heather was a thing she had never heard of. The door opened, and the hermit entered, carrying a large wooden bowl in his hand. After carefully setting this down, he came to the bedside and asked, "How do you find yourself, my daughter?" My back is very sore, father," said Erebus. It's not that this is her father, it's a respectful term. "But there is nothing else wrong with me." He knelt beside her, laid his hand on her forehead, and felt her pulse. "There is no fever," he said. "You will do well. Indeed, there is no reason why you should not get up tomorrow. But now, drink this." He fetched the wooden bowl and held it to her lips. Erebus couldn't help making a face when she tasted it, for goat's milk is rather a shock when you are not used to it. But she was very thirsty and managed to drink it all, and felt better when she had finished. "Now, my daughter, you may sleep when you wish," said the hermit, "for your wounds are washed and dressed, and though they smart, they are no more serious than if it had been the cuts of a whip." "It must have been a very strange lion, for instead of catching you out of the saddle and getting his teeth into you, he has only drawn his claws across your back. 10 scratches, sore, but not deep or dangerous." I say," said Erebus, "I have had luck." "Daughter," said the hermit, "I have now lived 109 winters in this world, and have never met any such thing as luck. There is something about all this I do not understand. But if ever we shall know it, you may be sure we shall." "And what about Rapidash and his 200 horse?" asked Erebus. "They will not pass this way, I think," said the hermit. "They must have found a ford by now well to the east of us. From there they will try to ride straight to Anvard." "Poor Shasta," said Erebus. "Has he far to go? Will he get there first?" "There is good hope of it," said the old man. Erebus lay down again, on her side this time, and said, "Have I been asleep for a long time? It seems to be getting dark." The hermit was looking out of the only window, which faced north. "This is not the darkness of night," he said presently. The clouds are falling down from Stormness Head. That's the name of a mountain. In this world, at least, not a real mountain. This is fiction, but that's the name of a mountain in the story. Our foul weather always comes from there in these parts. There will be thick fog tonight. Next day, except for her sore back, Aravis felt so well that after breakfast, which was porridge and cream, the hermit said she could get up. And of course she at once went out to speak to the horses. The weather had changed, and the whole of that green enclosure was filled like a great green cup with sunlight. It was a very peaceful place, lonely and quiet. Hwin at once trotted across to Aravis and gave her a horse kiss. "But where's Bree?" said Aravis, when each had asked after the other's health and sleep. "Over there," said Hwin, pointing with her nose to the far side of the circle. "And I wish you'd come talk to him. There's something wrong, but I can't get a word out of him." They strolled across and found Bree lying with his face toward the wall, and though he must have heard them coming, he never turned his head or spoke a word. "Good morning, Bree," said Aravis. "How are you this morning?" Bree muttered something that no one could hear. "The hermit says that Chester probably got to King Lune in time," continued Aravis, "so it looks as if all our troubles are over. Narnia at last, hey, Bree?"
"I shall never see Narnia," said Bree in a low voice.
"Aren't you quite well, Bree, dear?" said Aravis. Bree turned round at last, his face mournful only as a horse's can be.
"I shall go back to Coloman,"
he said. "What?" said Aravis. "Back to slavery?"
"Yes," said Bree. "Slavery is all I'm fit for. How can I ever show my face among the free horses of Narnia? I, who left a mare and a girl and a boy to be eaten by lions, while I galloped as fast as I could to save my own wretched skin."
"We all ran as hard as we could."
"Chester didn't,"
snorted Bree. By the way, that was when I forgot to say said Hwin.
"Chester didn't," snorted Bree. "At least he ran in the right direction. Ran back. And that is what shames me most of all. I, who call myself a war horse and boasted of 100 fights, to be beaten by a little human boy. A child, a mere fool who had never held a sword nor had any good nurture or example in his life."
"I know," said Aravis. "I felt just the same. Chester was marvellous. I'm just as bad as you, Bree. I've been snubbing him and looking down at him ever since you met us. And now he seems to be the best of us all. But I think it would be better to stay and say we're sorry than to go back to Coloman."
"It's all very well for you," said Bree. "You haven't disgraced yourself. But I've lost everything."
"My good horse," said the hermit, who had approached them unnoticed because his bare feet made so little noise on that sweet, dewy grass. "My good horse, you've not lost nothing but your self-conceit. No, friend, don't put back your ears and shake your mane at me. If you're really so humble as you sounded a minute ago, you must learn to listen to sense. You're not quite the great horse you've come to think, from living among poor dumb horses. Of course you were braver and cleverer than them, you could hardly have helped being that. It doesn't follow you'll be anyone very special in Narnia. But as long as you know you're nobody special, you'll be a very decent sort of horse, on the whole, and taking one thing with another. And now if you and my other four-footed cousin will come round to the kitchen door, we'll see about that other half of mash." And that is the end of chapter 10. Yeah, the end of chapter 10. I want you to think about what that hermit said. we've already seen that though Bree is very, very knowledgeable about things, he's a little smug. He's a little conceited. I mean, in the last chapter, he was pretty rude to Hwen. And now he's getting a talking to by an old man. So, and also that's something, what he said there is something good to apply to your life too. I mean, just because you failed in one aspect or another doesn't mean that you can't try again and do better. It's not the end. It's not the end of the world. These books are great. Lots of good nuggets in there if you can just search for them. But anyways, that's the end of this chapter, and that's where we will leave off.